Hi, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Welcome to the One America Movement's Candid Conversations, where every week we have a different conversation with someone about the issues that matter in our country, how those issues are dividing us, and what we can do about it. Today, of course, we have a very special guest who I will introduce in just a second, Mayim Bialik, but we're so excited to have her with us to talk about the science of polarization and help folks just kind of get a sense for what's going on in our own brains and in our communities and in our relationships in this time of what feels like such great division. But for those of you who are joining us for the first time, the One America Movement is a national nonprofit. We are working to combat what we call toxic polarization in American society. Sometimes it feels like there's two bad choices. I think we get that a lot. Sometimes it feels like your choice is sort of endless partisan warfare or kind of some mushy centrist purple thing. But I assure you that is not true. At One America, what we are doing is bringing people together to do things together in their communities, to roll up our sleeves and work together on issues that matter, and to have conversations about things that matter, to work towards a better country, a stronger country, a more united country. So welcome. Our guest today is Mayim Bialik. You may know her as Amy Farrah Fowler from The Big Bang Theory or from the show Blossom, depending on how old you are. We've certainly heard both from folks in the last week. But that is a small part of who she is. She is a trained neuroscientist, a passionate activist, an observant Jew, a perfectly imperfect mother, and a complicated human being like the rest of us. Mayim, thanks so much for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I'm very glad to be here, and I'm sorry for the Wi-Fi snafu. I'm really glad that we got it together for today on my part.
It's all good. I think all of us have had a lot of video snafus over the last few months. For folks who want to find Mayim on YouTube, you can do that. And we'll throw that link up there. And you can also find her on her website, groknation.com. That's Grok with a K. Mayim, last few months, speaking of Wi-Fi, you've been working from home. Before we get into science and division and polarization and the election, what's that been like working from home with kids and all that?
Well, I'm obviously in an interesting industry where we're not able to film things right now, but I do have a production company. It's called Sad Clown Productions. And this has actually been a really good time for us to do a lot of prepping and a lot of finding writers and a lot of giving notes and a lot of things that you can do from home. I have a couple projects in development in animation. Animation is still up and running, so that's good. In terms of my kids are almost 12 and almost 15. And they've always been homeschooled, but working and schooling children is not how you homeschool. Usually you have one parent that is not working full time when you're trying to school your children remotely. So it's been a lot of video games in our house, to be quite honest, and a lot of juggling. My ex-husband and I usually feel like we have a pretty good distribution of like, I get to do my work stuff, and then when I'm with them, I'm not doing work stuff. But like now everything is blending in new ways and everybody's schedule's upside down. And also obviously with the Black Lives Matter movement, being a prominent part of quarantine, it's been a lot of educating ourselves more, talking to my kids about the things going on in the country and in the world. So I don't want to say it's been a heavy time, but we've been given the opportunity to talk about things in a way that we never have before. And I think you all understand that at One America.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's certainly more family time, right? Less time spent on airplanes and things like that. What has that been like working from home with the kid? Have you had Zoom bombings? I guess when you're 12, you're probably less likely to show up, and 15 less likely to show up behind your camera than my 7-year-old is, who shows up on
my kids, they've been pretty well conditioned to know to stay away from mama work stuff. And I think that's one of the things that homeschool kids do have kind of a leg up on already. They already know a lot about those distinctions because they've had to navigate them their whole lives. Yeah. Meaning we've been sharing space as we work kind of for their whole lives. So yeah, they're not that interested in being part of my life in general because they're almost 12.
Fair enough. And have people been making jokes about your animated characters staying socially distant, or is that only me that even had that thought?
No, we haven't had to talk about that yet. We're in early development, so those questions have not come up.
That's good. Well, I worked out in my closet for a while to stay away from my kids jumping on my Zoom calls. That worked pretty well until people started asking me, "Are you in your closet?" And that was a little awkward.
Well, a ring light can do wonders. It can even make a closet look like an office. So if you have to go back in, I'll send you one.
I appreciate that. So, obviously, a lot of folks know you from your role in The Big Bang Theory, where you play a neurobiologist, but you study neuroscience in real life. What was that like, and why did you decide to pursue that and get a PhD?
Yeah, I was a child actor. I was on a series from the time I was 14 to 19 called Blossom, and it was on after the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, so in the early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And after that ended, I was already 2 years out of high school. So I come from an immigrant family where you go to college no matter what. So I went to UCLA, which is local. I grew up in Los Angeles, and I studied neuroscience and got a minor in Hebrew and Jewish studies as my undergrad. And then I went straight on to the doctoral program, also at UCLA, in neuroscience. My field was psychoneuroendocrinology, which means I study the endocrine system, the adrenal glands, pituitary, hypothalamus, and how they relate to the brain, and then how that affects behavior. So I studied obsessive compulsive disorder, and I worked with a population of individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome. And that was the subject of my thesis. So that was 12 years of my life. And I had my first son in grad school. I wrote my thesis literally laying down, breastfeeding, and typing. And my second son, I was, 7 months pregnant when I took my doctoral hood. So he was born right after I became a doctor, as it were.
That's impressive.
It was a lot going on.
Yeah. Can you share with us what that syndrome is and how, what?
Prader-Willi syndrome is a syndrome of dysfunction of the hypothalamus, which is kind of in the middle of the brain. It's the size of 4 peas, and it connects to the pituitary gland and obviously releases a lot of really, really important hormones. The hypothalamus is also what controls puberty and growth, circadian rhythms, and eating. And Prader-Willi syndrome is a spontaneous mutation. It was the first human example of something called genomic imprinting. And people with Prader-Willi syndrome, it's about 1 in 15,000 are born with Prader-Willi syndrome. And they have the inability to know when they're full. So their desire to eat is very, very strong. And there's often other developmental and skeletal issues and cardiovascular issues that these populations have. There's been a tremendous amount of advances made with the administration of growth hormone, which allows them to grow taller so that the weight is better distributed. But they require very stringent regulation of food intake, and they often have a lot of behavioral issues surrounding that. And I specifically studied obsessive compulsive disorder in that population.
Wow, that's fascinating and really tragic too.
Yeah, it's a difficult disease, but also really beautiful family support. So I got to know a lot of these families, and there's a couple really great national organizations that provide support for these families. So I get to do work with them still, actually.
That's awesome. That's great to be able to use your platform too to help with that.
Yep.
And are you the president of the group of actors and actresses who are also neuroscientists, or is that a one-person group?
I think it is a one-person group, which is the best kind of club to be in, the kind that you no one can reject you and you're in charge of membership. So I guess it is. It's a one-person club.
Got it. So you're president, vice president.
I'm treasurer, everything.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are so grateful for you coming on today. We talk about science because there's a lot of science behind why human beings form into groups, why those groups come into conflict, why we get divided. There's science behind why you act the way you do when your uncle says that thing at Thanksgiving that you really, really disagree with. There's science behind why we're so bad at having conversations in general, and especially on social media. And so when we think about the divisions in our society, the science can actually give us hope about what's possible. And so we'd love to talk with you about some of that science and help folks understand that. And to do that, we're going to actually play a game. It's called the What's Happening game. So we're going to do it. Yeah. So, and there's a prize. If you win, you get a One America t-shirt. which is also free, promotion for us. So it's not really a prize, but we're going to give you an example of some of these dynamics from pop culture.
Okay.
And then you're going to tell us what you see happening. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, I'll do my best. Like, I want to say that, like, I'm just one neuroscientist. I'm going to do my best here. Don't judge all of science by me, but I will do my best.
That's fair, but given how bad we are at having conversations and how bad we are at everything else right now, I think that anything you say will probably be helpful.
I can't make it worse. Okay, great.
Yeah, no, you can't make it worse. All right, so first up, we're going to go with the Butter Battle book. I don't know if folks have read this book, this Dr. Seuss book, but in the Butter Battle book, there's two groups, very polarized groups. May sound familiar. They have a very important disagreement. One side believes that you should butter your toast on the butter side up. The other side believes you should butter your toast on the butter side down. This is the only disagreement they have. But as they get more and more opposed to each other as teams, eventually they almost nuke each other. So what's going on, Mayim, in that situation where people get into those us versus them groups?
Okay, so essentially, it's important to remember that that we are animals. We are one of the amazing animals on this planet, and we're a very special kind of animal. We're a mammal, and we know what mammals do. And in addition, we're an even more exciting subset of mammals. We're primates, and primates have some very, very specific methods of communication and bonding. And one of the things that primates tend to do is to form tribes. And what can happen is, in our desire to fortify our tribe, as it were, which is really our identity, our existence, our rights to exist, we can tend to automatically create kind of a polarizing feature where we have to be in a position of superiority to feel safe. And this is not pseudoscience. These are the things that animals do to protect their territory, to protect their ability to raise children and perpetuate the species. So butter side up, butter side down is also a really beautiful example of this, because the story is really also about everyone giving completely legitimate reasons for both sides. There's really not a clear way to go. I mean, I have opinions, and I'm sure you do too. But this is what happens in the human brain when we are placed with an opposing, very strong and kind of equal argument. How'd I do?
No, that's great. You're well on your way to the t-shirt. But I wanted to ask a follow-up on that. So you talked about the need to form groups, right? The need to be in a group to survive. And can you talk about what, like, it's not just that we want, that we think our group is right all the time, right? It's that we isn't that we care more about being in the group because it gives us meaning and belonging?
Yeah, correct. And I think what's, kind of disturbing, and we see this in a lot of really fascinating, animal observations in particular, you will often see animals behaving wrongly or in ways that don't necessarily make sense in order to preserve to preserve that unit. And often we can trace it to, a need to keep gene pools small and things like that. There's fascinating research in that. But yes, exactly what you're describing is it's a natural extension really of how we're wired.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get a little later into examples of what happens when you stand up against your group.
Right.
And all that. Yeah. So, with the butter side up, at One America, we call this toxic polarization, right? The idea that our disagreement has morphed from being an actual disagreement over policy to just a battle over which team you're on. And that kicks in all these feedback loops that push us farther and farther apart. And so it's not that our policy disagreements don't matter. They matter profoundly. But we need to even get to a place where we're talking about policies instead of just fighting over which team you're on. So awesome. All right. Next up, we have, speaking of stand up to your groups, Neville Longbottom from Harry Potter 1. So Neville is not the most popular kid in school at Hogwarts. His very popular friends, Harry and Hermione and Ron, are telling him they're going to go leave the common room where they are to go try to stop Lord Voldemort or some serious thing like that. And he says, "No, guys, you're going to get us in trouble. I can't let you leave." And he's even willing to fight them to keep them from leaving, which is a pretty courageous thing for Neville to do, because these are some of the only people who aren't mean to him, right? Who actually let him be around. And so they move past him and they ignore him, of course. And then at the very end, Professor Dumbledore says, "Neville, you've been awarded points for your house because it's hard to stand up to your enemies, but it's just as hard to stand up to your friends."
Right.
So can you talk about what it's like for us as a species to stand up to the people in our own group, to stand up to our friends when we think they're wrong, and what's going on with that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a complicated one and a really, really good example. I mean, one of the first things that comes to mind is the importance of a diversity of opinion in the first place, meaning there are reasons why a democratic system, for example, or a parliamentary system exists and has evolved, as it were, in our culture, because it takes a lot of different perspectives to see things. So that's the first thing that I thought of, is that thank goodness for diversity. Without it, we would not evolve, meaning we need differences in order to challenge us to move forward or decide if we're going to move forward or not. So that was kind of the first thing I thought of. And in addition, it takes particular brains and particular personalities, and we see this not just in humans. It takes particular personalities to be able to be persuasive and to be able to help the group see larger. And indeed, much more difficult when you're confronting members of your own group or tribe, as opposed to defending your tribe against the other. So right. This is something also a great example of how things can go very wrong when you have an inability, even within a group, to agree on how to move forward. Am I getting close? How do we feel?
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes sense. And you said it earlier, right? The sense of if you're in a group, you want that group to feel like from a superior position, because that gives you protection, right?
Right.
Maybe it used to be from lions, now it's from ostracization or whatever. But
right.
Standing up to your own group, that also threatens that, right? Doesn't that puts you in a position where if you get kicked out of your own group, where do you go?
Right. I mean, like, I've seen that Lion King, like I've seen that play out when, someone tries to do so. I know what happens. You don't need to be a neuroscientist to figure that out. But again, as we've seen, even just in Homo sapiens sapiens development, it takes people with unbelievable ideas. It takes Galileos and it takes Da Vinci's. It takes Einstein's, it takes Musk's, it takes all of those people who are thinking far outside what any of us had thought about. That was not a statement on Elon Musk's personal comments. It was more about his business sense and futuristic thinking. I'll shut up now.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, we wouldn't want cancel culture to come in there, but yeah, it's absolutely right, and this sense of we don't get smarter or better if the only voices we're hearing are ones that already agree with us and are
Correct.
exactly like us. And
correct.
We're getting worse at that too, it seems, in terms of our news channels, the people we associate with, etc. Yeah. The word we use to describe Neville, it's actually kind of a misnomer. We're going to work on it, but in-group moderate, right? Because there's nothing moderate about this. To have the courage to stand up to your own group when you think they're going the wrong way, that takes enormous courage. And we've seen examples of that in our society. You've seen examples of it in middle school, right, or elementary school, when someone stands up to a bully. It's easy to stand up against the people that we all dislike, but it's a lot harder to stand up to your friends, your whole sense of community, if you feel like they're going off track. But it's incredibly important. And that's why at One America, we believe Neville is a hero, even though he's apparently wearing pajamas with teddy bears on them in this picture.
I think our greatest heroes probably wear pajamas like that.
That's probably true. Yeah, that's fair. All right. Our next one is called is from Wreck-It Ralph, which is a movie I admit I have not seen. Have you seen Wreck-It Ralph?
I actually haven't, but my kids have told me pretty much all about it.
Good. Well, I my kids have not, so I'm gonna be behind you on this one. But basically, Ralph is a video game villain who wants to be a hero, but no one believes he's capable of being good, and he actually goes to bad anon, so he can learn to understand who he is. Right? I'm bad, and that's good, he says, and I'll never be good, and that's not bad. But basically, Ralph's perception of who he is driven in part by what others think of him and what he thinks others think of him. So can you talk about that concept, right? About how human beings process what they think other people think of them?
Yeah, so this is something that, while other animals absolutely care what others think of them, this is something that, we tend to really have in some of our more primate specific communities. I'm hesitant to say that this is a specifically human quality, meaning our species specifically, because I think that we do see it in other primates, chimps being the most, our closest relative. The notion that, sorry, I'm just trying to think of how to articulate this. The notion that we can change is a really big concept, and one that is, I think, very specific to the human, brain, in terms of interpreting input and processing it in some of those, very intricately developed parts of the brain that we do really see specifically in humans and our closest primates. The notion of reflection and being able to reflect what we do, what others want from us. Expectation is, I think, really what we're talking about. Does that help?
Yeah. So can you sort of just explain more? So if I'm walking down the street and I see someone, what do I do? I'm immediately processing what they think of, what I think they think of me, or like.
So yeah. So if we didn't care what people think of us, go back hundreds of thousands of years, we wouldn't feel a need to belong. And belonging is very important, right? Belonging is survival. It's perpetuation of the species. It's having mates. It's having people help you raise your babies, and I'm not just talking about humans.
Sure.
Those are the things that we do for membership and survival. So built into our more elaborate social brain is the notion that I can do things that disrupt that, and I can do things that solidify that. And so what is, again, wired in is that kind of awareness. And what we see in certain populations with spectrum disorders is really some sort of disconnect or not completely clear notion of what other people think of you. And for parents who have children on the spectrum, it can be really liberating to see how children actually, and adults, actually behave if you don't care what other people think of you. But for Wreck-It Ralph purposes, we do have this notion that some people are also more sensitive to this. And that's where we get the beautiful variation in human behavior and existence. I have actor friends who literally, when they're called for an audition, they wear sequin go-go boots and do the craziest things to get noticed. And they get the part because it's a commercial where they want crazy people. If I had to go in like that, I would stay in the corner and cry, because my concept of other people judging me is very, very pronounced. And that's just a feature of my genetic distribution. There's a lot of things that play into why some people are more really hyper anxious about this and hyper vigilant. So you're going to see a variation across humans. And generally speaking, emotionally, we don't want to be obsessed with what other people think of us, but it is absolutely normal to be scanning for who's an ally and who's not, is essentially what that is.
That is so fascinating. It's so interesting to think about. It's been difficult for kids who are on the spectrum because they, have all the things they're dealing with, but also liberating to see what children can be like when they're not worried about that.
And adults, right?
And adults, yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes
absolutely.
less liberating with adults, but yes.
Yeah, everything's a little bit better when it's kids. But yeah, no, that's super interesting. Thank you. And I think, yeah, for us, polarization, the toxic form, right? it distorts how we view a lot of things. And I think this is a really interesting example, right? So human beings do, as you say, have perceptions about how others view them, but and we call those meta perceptions, right? But the problem is that Democrats and Republicans are spectacularly bad at actually accurately guessing how much the other side dislikes them. And what scientists have found, the ones that we work with have found, is that if you think the other side hates you, you hate them back. And when you find out the other side doesn't hate you as much as you do, as you thought they did, you can start to create a positive feedback cycle. So for all of you out there who you have that family member or that relative, just start the conversation by letting them know that you love them and that you don't think, all the worst things that they might think you think about them, if that made any sense. And you can start to unravel those meta perceptions. All right, I think we've got one or two more. The next one is Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Oh, if I didn't hear about this every day of my life for like 4 years.
Yeah, I think a new addition to that club based on my kids. But has that been a pleasurable experience?
I mean, I'd say it was very pleasurable. It's not happening right now, but a couple years ago, it was incredibly beloved in my children's life. Got it.
Well, I have never seen it, so I'm going to, again, speak from a place of ignorance. But my understanding, what folks have told me, is that the whole world is basically in a war against the Fire Lord, and the Fire Lord's a bad dude. But that, and that the people who want to defeat the Fire Lord obviously want to do so from a good place. But that the citizens of Fire Nation, the people who live in Fire Nation, they're being told that everyone else is threatening their way of life. And so when they're defending the Fire Lord, it's not because they love evil, it's because they're reacting to what they're being told. And I think that speaks to motives, right? Even if you may disagree with someone, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're coming from a place of bad motives. What can you say in terms of motive, human beings' intentions and motives, and guessing other people's intentions and motives?
This is a tough one. These are getting harder. So
you got to earn that T-shirt.
Seriously. Yeah. I think one of the things that, again, we're going to see this more in humans for sure. I know that it exists in humans. I always try and look to, is it also happening? Is it also happening in our closest primate relatives? I'm switching earbuds, so just give me a second, but I can still hear you.
Sure.
I think that one of the, I don't want to say unfortunate, but one of kind of the corollary things that happens when we try and form tribes or identities is what's kind of built into that is a need to demonize the other. And this is obviously very, very, it can be very problematic. And one of the exceptional things about, being human is our ability to cognitively understand that and kind of push past that. So the notion that, other animals, for example, will fight something out, that's generally not our first go-to, as Homo sapiens sapiens. Unless you're watching hockey, in which case that seems to be the first thing that happens, like, let's fight. But I think that's really kind of the underlying, motivation is to try and fortify your position, by essentially denigrating, another. How'd I do now?
No, that's so, like, so why do we keep falling for it, right? Like,
we keep falling for it because we're animals, and to a certain extent, we are wired this way, again, for comfort. We're seeking comfort, we're seeking a feeling or even a fake sense of security. And I think you do see that a lot, particularly in political conversations. They're trying to make you feel safe. But the fact is, everybody has a different notion of safe. So they're going for what feels safest for most people who are going to potentially vote for me. Apparently wearing suits and being the age of a great-grandfather is like a thing right now. I don't know. No, but I think we have things provided to us that can provide safety, and it's the amazing ability of our emotional and highly developed brain to be able to bring reason into that conversation and to not fall into that notion of kind of a negative tribalism, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So we have a choice,
Oh
unlike
yeah.
other species. We have an
Yeah, and
active choice.
I think like this is something, I was born in 1975, so very different set of things going on when I was, let's say, my kid's age. But right to life, for example, brought up a lot of these conversations in terms of how do we have conversations? How do you have conversations with someone if you literally do not believe the same thing? Where is there a point even to still have communication?
Mhm.
So yeah, this is going to keep coming up, and it's especially, I think, prevalent right now.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's really helpful. I mean, I think motives is a starting point, right? Like if I disagree with you about an issue, we can have a relationship, we can talk. If I think you're
Sure.
motivated by hate and evil, why
Right.
would I want to have a relationship with you? And
Right. And by the same token, if I believe that your type of people are motivated by something different than
right,
mine, like oh, we think rationally, but your people don't,
right.
that's also, it's the same danger.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. The idea that an entire group of people is their essentialism different from us is a whole other thing that's extremely dangerous as part of this.
Right.
The science term for this is really it's going to be on bumper stickers and it's going to have a hashtag any day now. Motive misattribution, which is
Oh
actually
yeah, it just rolls off the tongue.
yeah, well, it's actually the short version, right? The real one is motive attribution asymmetry. The idea
Yeah,
that we
I like this better.
yeah, I think they improved. They got it alliterative anyway. The idea is we think our side acts out of love and their side acts out of hate. Think
Yeah.
about guns, abortion, like so many issues. It's not even that it's not enough that we disagree with someone. It's that we believe and we're told constantly by politicians, media, etc., that they are motivated by negative intentions. And again, the
Well,
research
yeah.
goes off, right? Like we get it wrong about what they're motivated by. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. No, and I was just going to say that, we see this really in any country that has opposing ideas that tend to divide along religious lines,
Sure.
and sometimes ethnic lines. But I think that's something, that our country in particular, the United States, is still grappling with. There was a population that lived here for a very long time
Yeah.
that was not Judeo-Christian, and the evolution of the population growth of this country made it such that there was a strong religious sensibility, but it's not necessarily reflective of our population or national identity. And I
Right.
think that's a lot of what you get into, because I believe in the division of church and state, as do most people say they do. But when a lot of the thoughts that are behind some of political decisions feel like they are falling on religious lines, you get these concepts also of love and hate, or
Mhm.
good and evil, that really are different concepts. Those are moral and ethical and religious concepts, and not necessarily political or human ones.
Right. Yeah, and of course, the more it becomes good and evil, the more
Right.
the stakes get raised, the threat level gets raised. Like,
Correct.
yeah, awesome. All right, we're gonna. You're doing so well. We're gonna give you one more.
Okay.
This is the Parent Trap.
Oh, so cute.
Yeah. Although I was told by a person I'm married to that that we should have used the older Parent Trap
I was
movie.
going to say, this is not the original. This is a whole different generation, but you flatter me that I would have seen this version.
Fair enough. As most of you know, if you've seen The Parent Trap, it's two girls. They meet at summer camp. They instantly hate each other. They have nothing in common. They play pranks on each other, and they realize, which it bizarrely takes them a while, that they're twins. That they just have never met because their parents have divorced and live on opposite sides of the country.
Hate when that happens.
Yeah. So, what can you say about this idea that we think we're going to have nothing in common with, we think we're going to be against people, and then we actually find out we have a lot of shared values, shared humanity.
Oh, okay. So this really speaks to, again, the power and the beauty of some of that higher reasoning, and some of that, things that we tend to think of as human. But you will see this in other primates as well. There's a notion of an ability to expand after an initial judgment. And, again, we've talked about the reasons that we polarize. We've talked about sort of how protective that can be or feel, sometimes it's an illusion, right? It's an illusion of kind of control. But again, I would point to the fact that the human brain in particular has the capacity to change. It has the capacity to grow, and that includes judgment and fear. And, there's a specific region of the brain called the amygdala, which is in charge of a specific kind of fear, but it's connected to a very elaborate network of emotional content that is managed by the brain. And some of it is conscious and some of it is unconscious. Sometimes the way someone smells will make your brain say, too different, but it is our ability to have a cognitive experience of that and say, there's more here. I don't just need to think with that old part of my brain, what can the new part learn and where can it grow? And I think, we see it, there's a reason that people do advocacy work with young people, because the brain is still developing, and the frontal lobe and judgment and impulse control continues to develop all through your teens and even into your 20s. So a lot of beautiful, I've seen a lot of beautiful work, for example, with the Israeli-Palestinian situation, with young people learning what they do have in common, learning where they can connect, finding points of joy and touch points of joy in ways that are reasonable and still respect the other's perspective and experience. That's our ability as humans. And that's really the place I think that we're going to hopefully see change, is with helping young people see that the things they've been taught are not always the whole story. And we get to also have kids. I mean, my kids teach me things, they tell me things like, Mama, we don't say that anymore. That's not the word we use. Oh, okay. Tell me what word we use now,
That's awesome. And that's very hopeful too. Right. And so I guess my question is, so are you saying that in some sense, the easy thing, like the part of your brain that reacts most quickly, is kind of going with that is kind of the easy way out, but like we have the ability to fight through that to a different part of our brain? Is that accurate?
Correct. I mean, you will find people in history, with unbelievable stories of tremendous compassion from the get-go, tremendous empathy, altruistic behavior. Generally speaking, we're going to fight to defend what feels safest, and what feels closest and the least amount of kind of work. It's kind of the path of least resistance. Right. But again, that's our challenge and the beauty of being a human conscious being. Like, look at the ways we can talk, look at the challenges we can have. And also, this is just a general shout out, for a concept of advancing our mental health, because our ability to tolerate difference is going to vary depending on how much emotional resource we have on any given day. So if I'm stressed out, if I'm living in poverty, if I'm in a situation where there's alcoholism in my home, if I can't get out of the situation I'm in, I am a lot less likely to have the resources, to have the patience for these kind of conversations. So it's something that would really behoove our country in particular to invest in people's mental health and overall well-being, so that we can have these kind of conversations coming from a full tank of gas and not just fumes, which is what many Americans right now are really running on.
That is so fascinating. And I imagine that also explains for a lot of folks out there who are watching, if you've been feeling stressed over the last few months, which I think all of us have to some degree, and you felt yourself even less able to hear other opinions or perspectives.
Oh yeah. I'll tell you, the other times that I've noticed that happen in my life was right after I gave birth, because my brain was so rocked by hormones and stress and all those things that I couldn't hear really anything. And the other was after my father passed away. And that's something that grief will do to your brain. Grief will make your brain not want to line up and be open to other things. And we're basically living, in anticipatory grief right now, with this virus. We're all just kind of like waiting to see what's going to happen. We don't know. That's going to make our tolerance a lot lower.
That makes a lot of sense. So folks, we got to go out there and support each other in whatever ways. Call that person who's lonely, send food if you're able to, and we'll get through this. But it's a lot harder to do this when you're feeling like you don't have much to give. In terms of the sisters and this idea that you think you have nothing in common, that you have to get through that part of your brain, our polarization is so stupid that it actually obscures how much we agree on. And we call this false polarization, right? So this is not mushy. This isn't, we're all one. No, studies show that on immigration, for instance, Democrats and Republicans on a 100-point scale are something like 30 points apart, and they think they're 60 points apart. And that has real consequences, because if we think we're 60 points apart, why would we bother? The only solution at that point is just to beat them so we can pass what we want to pass. But if we're 30 points apart and there's a whole bunch of overlap, then maybe we could actually solve some problems that we're facing. So it's not as bad as we think it is. Thanks for playing this game. You did extraordinarily well.
Do I get the t-shirt?
You definitely get the t-shirt. Yes, great job. We appreciate it. We want to ask you one more question, two more questions before we go. But the next question is really about the intersection of science and faith, right? One America, we work with religious communities. We are all about science and faith, and that's another thing that's often seen as in conflict with each other in some way. We disagree about that. We think that they are both important and that they are both complementary. But we'd love to hear your perspective as someone who's an observant member of the Jewish faith and a neuroscientist. How have those things interacted for you?
This is one of my favorite questions, and one that I never tire of speaking about. It's actually, interestingly, one of my most viewed videos on my YouTube channel is about science and religion, because I think that even for people who are certain that there's no God, I think they're sometimes fascinated by people who can have that faith, especially those of us who are scientists. And what I say some general things. Obviously, this could be the topic of its own, hour or thesis. For almost every single religious person that I know, who also is a scientist, we kind of share a very similar notion that, religious books, the Torah, the Bible, those are not science books. They're not supposed to be. That's not what the purpose is of those books. So that's kind of like the first point. The second point is, more a personal one for me. The more that I learn about the brain, the nervous system, the scientific world, the more I know that there's not a formula to write for that. And that's not to say like, the essence of God had to come down. But I do believe that there's an element of mystery to the universe, to evolution, to the fact that we had to get here somehow. Like, everybody had a mom. Okay, but what about that first person? Like, the way my son asks, like, wait a second, how did, that's the element of mystery that I consider a divine mystery. And I do not spend my time as a scientist wringing my hands over that, because I also know that there are experiences that there is no formula for. If you're a parent, you've probably experienced tremendous waves of a variety of emotions that you've never felt, or never felt in that combination, or never felt with that frequency or intensity. And to me, that's a divine element of our existence. So the fact that I believe that when the sun comes up every day, that it's a miracle happening that we get to witness as humans, and it makes me want to thank the universe, that's not really different from someone who believes that the sun's going to come up and chooses not to engage with it. Meaning, it's the same faith. We have the same faith in the universe if you believe the sun will come up and I do. And I choose to have reverence around it. I choose to meditate about it. I choose to acknowledge it in a way that's consistent with my ethnic line and thousands of years of history. But that doesn't mean that we don't have a place to connect. Everything that I have studied in my religious training has made me more and more appreciative of the world of science and the mysteries that we can understand. But to me, I consider the love that I feel for my children a scientific fact and also a divine fact. They don't need to exist separately. And I know that because I live that existence.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. Thank you. And have you sort of, I don't want to over dramatize this, but have you sort of fought that battle in different circles? Like, have you had scientists who are sort of like, how can you?
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, honestly, it's mostly non-scientists who are outraged that I believe in God. You know, I've definitely interacted with a lot of scientists for whom it's just not an issue. And that's fine. To me, that's also kind of a personality thing. Like, you're allowed to not have religious structure be what you want to do. I happen to be a very detail-oriented person, and traditional Judaism gives me a lot of opportunity for my OCD to feel very comfortable. I'm not just joking. Like, it's a very structured life, which I like. It's also a very intellectually stimulating life, which I love. But it doesn't have to be for everyone. And like, to me, there's one thing that keeps the earth spinning. You may call it something different than I do. Someone across the world may have 300 gods that they use to facilitate getting in touch with that. There's really only, like, to me, there is a oneness that exists for all of us. And like I said, I don't really wring my hands over it because it makes me appreciate science more. And my science makes me appreciate the things that I can't explain even more.
Yeah. Thank you. That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, I've been really lucky to be thinking about those things too last few years. And there's a neuroscientist we work with who's a Christian, and he talked about the passage in the Christian Gospel of John where it says perfect love drives out fear, and how if you think about that neuroscientifically, right, like when you're touched affectionately by someone who loves you, it does drive out the chemicals that push
I
fear.
wouldn't use that as proof that like that's the correct God or anything, and I'm sure he was not either, but that's where it can also get dangerous. You know, they need to exist separately, but also they're together.
Yeah, and pointing towards the same sense of where we're supposed to be in terms of being with each other and being, you know, treating other people with love and so forth. So
yeah,
awesome. Thank you. And you know, at One America, we're doing this work in part because, you know, obviously we love our country and we know it's a hard time. There's a lot, you know, from the reckoning with centuries of racism, the pandemic, and now what promises to be the most toxic election, I think, at least since, I don't know, maybe 1860.
Maybe ever. Let's just
maybe
say
ever.
ever.
Maybe ever. We need to make a real effort now to create the kind of country that we want to have beyond the next 6 months. And so we want to think about that vision, right? You know, there's no shortcut here. We have a shared future as a country, and we need to figure out what that future is going to be. So with our guests on Candid Conversations, we'd like to close by asking just kind of, what's your vision? What's your vision for the future of this country? What do you want it to look like? And what are your hopes?
Oh gosh, it's a hard last question.
Yeah.
You know, I think that. You know, I think it's no joke that this is different than other elections. You know, I often, you know, talk with friends about, are we making our kids feel like we're these hysterical parents of like, it was never this bad when I was a kid. But this is it's an unprecedented time. You know, we're looking at hundreds of thousands of people dead from a pandemic. Millions of people are out of work. You know, the impact of what happens around the world affects us, whether it's Beirut or whether it's China. You know, we have a global identity as citizens of this America. And I think, you know, we're at a crossroads, and this is sort of why, you know, I'm so happy to talk to you this week. We do have the choice of kind of sweeping our differences under the rug and being like, we're fine, it's fine. There's also, you know, a lot of, I'm really trying to be impartial here. There's a lot of kind of weaponizing the pandemic. And, you know, this can happen on all sides of everything. But I think that, you know, committing to kind of rebuilding while respecting the things that make America great and diverse is really critical right now. So I think obviously you have the Corona Rebuild initiative, which I'm very excited also to be learning more about. The idea of working together to solve common challenges in ways that are respectful and really listen to people and help them work past a lot of the, the pitfalls, honestly, that as humans we're gonna be susceptible to. So I don't know, I'm sure you will also post the information. Coronarebuild.org, right, there it is the place where people can learn more. There's also a talk to your neighbor guide, which I'm super about, because I think that we really have lost the ability to even know how to engage in a lot of places, not just with neighbors, but even with family. And I've heard so many people say, I can't believe I don't know how to continue this friendship, this relationship. Like, that's devastating. That will have more of an impact possibly than anything that we're talking about. We cannot lose the ability to work together and talk together. So, I have a lot of personal, concerns, and obviously, like, the Black Lives Matter movement is very prominent in my consciousness right now. But we're seeing a real reckoning in our society of how women are treated, how our LGBTQ plus friends and sisters and brothers are treated, and I think we're finally looking at the discrepancy in wealth and distribution of resources in this country. This is something for those of us who grew up with that consciousness, either ourselves or through work that our families did. This is a real problem. And for those of you just kind of like learning about it, this has been going on literally almost forever. And the time to face it is now, but we have to face it together with open conversation.
Amen. Yeah. I mean, I think if we thought the pandemic would magically, like the aliens in Independence Day, bring us together, no, it really exacerbated, right, to your point, a lot of the divisions and inequalities in our country. And yeah, we need to work together to build something different. Well, like Mayim said, we are kicking off this new initiative, Corona Rebuild, where we're asking people across the country to make a commitment to work together across divides, from a social distance if needed, or virtually, or in any other way that you want, to rebuild our country. So you can join us, join others across the country from all political perspectives, races, religions, and views, to do the work of building the kind of country that we want. As Mayim mentioned, we do have a resource right now called the How to Talk to Your Neighbor Guide that you can get at coronarebuild.org. It's very helpful to talk to that uncle at Thanksgiving, or when you want to talk to before Thanksgiving. And we're grateful that you'll join us in that work. Mayim, Bialik, thank you so much for being on this show and for everything.
Thank you. This was really fun, and I'm glad I won. I won my t-shirt.
You were the one and only winner of that contest. No, but seriously, thanks for everything you're doing. Thanks for bringing faith and science together, and for all the work you're doing out there in the world. We're really grateful.
Thank you, and thank you for all the work that you're doing. And I know your mom was disappointed that we didn't get it done on Monday, but we got it done today. So good job, Andy.
Hey, Mom. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend. And we'll see you next week.